2016, when Trump promised to deliver, evangelicals bought into his candidacy because even though he did not seem to represent the values and morals and religiosity that had defined other Republican candidates, Trump promised to deliver.
Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore how religion is lived. I'm your host, Rachel Schneider, a religion scholar and director of the Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. Today, we're going to be talking about religion's intersection with the media and politics. My guest is Diane Winston, a scholar who works at the intersection of religion, media, and culture. She holds the Knight Chair in Media and Religion at the University of Southern California, and her most recent book is Writing the American Dream: How the Media Mainstreamed Reagan's Evangelical Vision. So we're going to be talking about that book and its implications for our current moment, as well as Diane's broader work on religion and media. Thank you so much for joining us, Diane.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be with you here.
So in your recent book that I just mentioned, Writing the American Dream, you examined how the media played a really significant role in shaping perceptions of a religiously infused vision of the American dream during the Reagan era. What lessons do you think that moment in American media history holds for understanding where we are today, politics in this current moment?
It's interesting, Rachel, because even though today seems far removed from 1980, there are many of the same inflection points in politics, media, and religion. So, for example, when Reagan was running in 1980, the country was still reeling from a decade of economic instability, social turmoil, counterculture, oil embargoes, Iranian Revolution, and people felt they needed something to hold on to. They wanted to feel stable. There was a lot of feeling, especially among certain segments of the population, that they were being left behind and being replaced. That's similar to what we have today, where people feel like inflation is really cut into their pocketbooks. There's people who feel like immigrants are taking their jobs, that no one's paying attention to their needs. And for many people, the last decade or so, with changes in our attitudes towards sexuality and gender, those have been destabilizing. So culturally, we're at a very similar moment. And just as people saw Reagan as a change agent in 1980, many people see Trump similarly as a real change agent. And what I argue in the book is that Reagan offered a new narrative for Americans, a new way to think about how they individually and collectively identified what was important to them as citizens. And I think in many ways Trump does the same thing. He's allowing Americans to think about themselves in ways that many people feel are empowering.
A lot has been made about the Evangelical Christian voting bloc and its relationship to Trump. How does that relate at all to the movement that you were studying happening in American society under Ronald Reagan?
When Jimmy Carter was elected in 1976, the media and much of the country discovered evangelicals. That probably sounds crazy to the millions of evangelicals then and now, but the coastal elites, of which the media are a great representative of, really hadn't thought much about evangelicals until Carter talked about being born again. And once this evangelical bloc was called up, they began agitating for presidential candidates who would fulfill their wish list. And that wish list had ending abortion at the top of it. It had parent school. It had, ways to legitimize the heterosexual nuclear family. And every 4 years, the Republican candidate would say he's going to do that, all that. And no one ever really did. And so in 2016, when Trump promised to deliver, evangelicals bought into his candidacy because even though he did not seem to represent the values and morals and religiosity that had defined other Republican candidates, Trump promised to deliver. And Americans knew him from The Apprentice. They knew him from his brand. They knew Trump got things, they believed Trump got things done.
Right.
And so evangelicals, one might say, made a pact with the devil because they were willing to support a man who did not represent their values, but promised to fulfill their agenda.
Right. That has continued to have reverberations in our society. How would you describe the portrayal of religious values in the media today and also, in the past recent decades?
What's striking about the portrayal of religious values today is, as I implied, every 4 years the media would discover evangelicals. This year, they didn't have to discover them. They've been very prominent in our politics and social and cultural life for the last 4 years. So there was less of that kind of rote, here are evangelicals and here's where they live. And as a result, there's been less discussion of religious values, at least explicitly religious. And part of that is because Trump himself, although he has adopted the evangelical agenda, is not tremendously religious in his own life. And so there's not a lot for him to go into. Like he'll say, my favorite book is the Bible, but if you push him on, which book in the Bible or what message, it's problematic. I also want to add that almost 30% of the country now is religiously unaffiliated.
Right. That's a huge thing.
Right. And especially young people. And so speaking a very heavy language of religion really wouldn't necessarily reach them. So that's another reason we've heard less about religion.
Yeah. So fascinating. I mean, as it relates to the Democratic Party, and we're thinking about, we're scholars of religion, so we think about, like you already mentioned, the rise in unaffiliation, but we often see on the Democratic Party side so much religious diversity, religious pluralism. And so that's a question, I'm just curious your thoughts on this. The question that I've often reflected on is how do you craft a compelling, it's easier to craft a compelling moral vision when there's some degree of homogeneity in the types of people who are drawn to that vision. And how do you craft a compelling moral grammar that taps into, these aspirational ideals of the nation in a way that really resonates with people. And I that's just been a struggle. I don't know, do you share that perspective, or what are your thoughts about being able to craft a different vision of the good?
I really thought Obama was going to do that in 2008 when he was elected. And I think there was a potential to do that, whether he didn't want to follow up or it wasn't in his nature. It just never happened.
Yeah.
I thought I heard bits of that in Harris's initial campaigning when she talked about joy and hope. I think whereas policy questions are important and we want to know what leaders are going to do, this larger framework of what they see leadership is and where they want to lead us often isn't discussed. I wasn't alive when FDR was president, and there are many things about the New Deal that are far from perfect. But I believe he tried to give Americans a vision of what it meant to work together and to sacrifice together. And when he created programs for people who had no jobs, he really was expressing a large American idea of, guys, we're all in this together. And we have nothing to fear but fear itself. That wasn't him, but he might have as well said it.
Right.
So you have to be a capacious thinker and have a deep heart and sort of rise above partisan politics. And we haven't seen much of that in the last 50 years or so. I think my take on the Founding Fathers is that's what they wanted. The Founding Fathers really were wary of partisan politics, and they really were scared that that would eventually tear the country apart. And although they wanted to keep religion out of government, they did very much believe that you needed religion as a cultivator of personal virtue. And that cultivation of personal virtue and a sense of morality would keep politicians in check. Hasn't quite worked out that way in either case, but I think it's hard to govern people without a higher vision, because why would people follow anyone unless there was a vision sustaining them?
Yeah.
And Biden has done great things, but we haven't heard the vision behind them, so they often don't register. Trump's vision seems, I call it apocalyptic nihilism, like let's tear everything down and burn everything up and see what's left. And that's a hard vision for some of the country to get around.
Yeah, absolutely. It affects many people's lives directly. In your book, you really flesh out this concept of a religious imaginary. Can you tell us more about what that means and how you see it working out in American public life?
I'm a scholar, and I love the word imaginary because it's sort of like inside baseball. Mm-hmm. And another way to talk about an imaginary is a narrative. And the idea is that we all need a vision or a narrative or an imaginary to make sense of our world. And what a religious imaginary does is to give us a sense of what our most basic ethical, moral, spiritual, religious values are. And that helps us understand what we do in the world as parents, as employees, as volunteers, as politicians. It comes from a sense of our higher purpose. A lot of our religious narrative has been shaped by the Puritans and the Pilgrims. And throughout the 4 centuries since then, the idea that God blessed America has been pretty continuous, but it looks different at different times. Mm. And in the book, I say Roosevelt, his religious imaginary was that God blessed us with a great society, a society where we could care for each other and be compassionate and tolerant. And the imaginary changed under Reagan, and it became more of God blessed us with freedom as individuals. Mm. And our individual freedom meant that we'd live in a democracy with very little government, so we could be free politically. We live in an economic system driven by the market where anyone could do what they wanted in the market. And we lived free as religious people, so we were able to express our religious convictions in public. And what I argue is this imaginary has sugar-coated neoliberalism and allowed us to believe that creating a market-based society is a good thing, whereas it can be argued it's been very destructive, not just to us as individuals, but to the bonds of our community.
Yeah.
I mean, why do we have an epidemic of loneliness? Why do we have such deep polarization? Why do we have a rise of mental problems with our youth? It's because people feel atomized. They don't feel like they're part of a motivating, life-sustaining vision.
I mean, that's why, in my own work, I've been very interested in social movements and activist communities and spaces, in part because I think, especially for people who might be alienated from religion, it gives them that space of the collective and of connection around shared moral visions. And I don't think we're attending to that enough at the grassroots. And earlier today, you were talking to a group of our students here at the Religion and Public Life Center and at Boniek Institute. And you were talking about how a shift in our religious imaginary, it may come from either a grassroots movement or from a really strong leader. So what do we need to be looking for in the future? I mean, what would you like to see?
I'd like to see a leader or a mass movement of people who could talk across differences and remind us of what our shared humanity means. And I don't particularly care if that person is Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, because at a certain level, I believe all religions promote human flourishing and flourishing of the earth and societies. Of course, they're not the same, but I think they all are life-affirming. And so it doesn't matter how the vision is cast. It matters what its intent is. Mm. And that's why, I mean, it's easy for a politician to do it because they get the most exposure.
Right.
But I think some of our great artists, especially musicians, have tried to share this vision, and maybe they may have made an impact with it. But you need someone who has the pulpit to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and someone who in many ways becomes the symbol of the nation. I mean, we were talking earlier about my work in South Africa, and I always think of Nelson Mandela, becomes the embodiment of this vision of a new society. And we need something like that as people, as collectives. And in this moment, I think it's important to be thinking about the future, as difficult as it seems, and be at least speaking about the kind of society we want to live in and about human flourishing, especially when so much seems at risk. So I really appreciate you reflecting on that and posing the question earlier when we were just talking off mic. You said this idea that America's blessed, but blessed for what? And people have answered that in really different ways.
Yes, they've answered it in very different ways. And one of the problems with the media that I saw in 1983 and that I see now is that, A, it's hard for the media to convey these sentiments because they're not newsy. News is what's conflict-ridden, what's unusual, what's surprising, and talking about solid humanistic values is none of that. So we live in a world where the media around us doesn't really help us understand what it takes to be human.
Right. Human virtue isn't necessarily what sells newspapers.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But, I find some of it represented in media, in entertainment media.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. It's harder and harder. I recently read that the streaming services have realized that true crime and reality shows do a lot better than, shows that project what it means to be human, which you don't need to be sappy. I think Shogun was a great show.
Oh, absolutely.
That looked at what does it mean to be a human and how do we think about that cross-culturally. And there's plenty of violence in that. So I'm not saying that I'm looking for VeggieTales, but I think entertainment media has a way of bringing people together and raising these questions that news media just can't do.
Oh, I completely agree. I've been thinking recently about how entertainment and art has the capacity to present really nuanced moral visions, and that's what we need in this time, especially in a time of absolutism and polarization. Wow, I could go down this tangent with you for quite some time because I have lots of thoughts about entertainment and what it has to say. But Let me talk now about your work, which really blends history, religion, and media studies. One of the things that scholars of religion sometimes do and sometimes don't do is talk about their own personal stakes in the kinds of things that they study, and also their religious identity or background. So how has your own background shaped how you approach the study of religion and the kinds of questions you've pursued?
When I was a religion reporter, and now that I'm a religion scholar, I've been very aware that so many of my colleagues are PKs, preacher's kids. And so many of them were reporting on religion or researching religion because they were trying to understand their heritage. I grew up in an extremely secular Jewish home on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So I come from a very different background. I did not even think about religion very much growing up. When I wanted to rebel against my parents, I went to a Unitarian church. So, yeah, I went to Brandeis without realizing it was, a Jewish identified school. So until I got to graduate school at Harvard Divinity, I had no sense of that I was a member of a minority or that I was different than anyone.
Wow.
Strange to think, right? And I think that waking up to the reality that religion meant so much to people, and it motivated their political decisions, their marital decisions, their decisions about who to fight with,
right,
became such an intellectual curiosity to me that, I spent the rest of my life trying to understand it. So I think that helps explain why that most of my reporting was done in the South. And when I went back to school to get a doctorate, my focus was on American evangelicalism because that was new to me. And I wanted to learn it on the ground, talking to people, which I was fortunate to do. And then I wanted to study it. Mm-hmm. So I think my own background, although it was the opposite of being a PK, very much shaped what I did as a religion scholar.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, we do need those outside eyes often to really understand a phenomenon. And I am sure that you have brought that to the study of American evangelicalism. Not that you are like an outsider, but I think so often people who come to this topic often come out of it from the perspective of wanting to understand their own upbringing, as you said. So I'm really grateful that you have done the work that you've done to bring all these different angles and lenses. You work with a lot of students, and you also are very active in the public sphere, talking about religion and talking about media. What are your hopes as a scholar and really a public intellectual about the work that you do?
The more informed people are, the better their choices are. And to remind people about the power of media in shaping the way they think about the world is among the most significant things we can do right now, with media being as pervasive as it is in all our lives. And if I could say to people who watch Fox News, think about looking at some other media, or if I could tell the people who just read The Nation or The New York Times, think about looking at some other media, not just to change your minds, but to understand how other people think and what they're thinking about. Because if we are ever to heal the polarization,
right,
we need to know each other better and understand each other better and be able to come together. That's my brief for entertainment, because, you and I could be totally different in our thinking, but we both are watching Bridgerton. So it gives us something to talk about.
Yeah.
So I would hope my work inspires people to, use their imagination and their creativity and their smarts to put themselves in other people's shoes and to try to realize that there's more than one way to look at the world we live in.
I love that. Is there anything else about your work and life that we haven't already talked about that you would like to share with our listeners?
I love my children and my grandchildren.
Aww.
And I mean, part of my desire to make the world a safer place is thinking about future generations. Yeah. And for all those people thinking about getting PhDs, I think you should go become screenwriters.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, hopefully someone listening will take that call and write us when you do. Oh, thank you so much, Diane. It's been an absolute pleasure to be in conversation with you and for your work. It's really, really important.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rachel. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
And that's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. And my special thanks to our guest, Diane Winston. Today's show was written by myself, Elaine Howard-Eklund, and Haley Hemstreet. Our series is produced by Three Wire Creative. Religion Unmuted is a joint venture of the Bonick Institute and its Religion and Public Life Center at Rice University. And I'm Rachel Schneider. Until next time.